Hey, howdy, and welcome, everybody. It is time for this week's episode of Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. I am your host, Dr. Michael Lennox, here as I am every week with producer Zoe as we share our little journeys together with
Hey,
you.
Michael, how's it going?
It's going good. I'm glad to be in this week versus last week.
Yeah.
It's starting to lighten up. We're going to talk all about it. We're going to talk about the dates of November 14th through November 20th today.
The moon was pretty intense for you, right?
Yes, it was. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why, because in fact, I'm in a bit of a personal celebration with this week because my Saturn return, my second Saturn return officially ended yesterday.
That's awesome.
November 13th, Saturn hit the exact point where he was when I was born for the third and the final time in this year of my second Saturn return. But man, oh man, I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal experience, which I don't do a lot of. And every time I do a little bit of it, I get some feedback that people enjoy hearing some of my personal experience. But this year has been brutal for me. I liked, people are bumping into people out there in the world that I haven't seen in a little while. It's like, how you doing? And it's like, my answer is always, well, this is the hardest year since 2006. Because in 2006, I was struggling with the worst depression of my life and the biggest battle with my addiction, really ever. And so I sort of marked that as the last really brutal year of my adult life.
That was the relapse after your Christ walk, right?
Yeah, right. I spent a year and a half in this incredibly expansive consciousness that when it flipped away, when it diminished, I was back to my pedestrian self. And the benefit of that and the difficulty of that year or two that followed was sort of stunning because here's how I like to say this. Like, if I had never done any more work on myself, it would have been enough. My life would have been reasonable, right? But all of that expansiveness also helped me pinpoint the deepest shadow that was in me. Yeah. So that when the expansion sort of contracted back around me and I was sort of in my original pre-installed state, my psyche was like, all right, now you got to do the deep, 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 deep shadow work. And I did. And so here I am, years later. And when I was hanging out in 2021, knowing that 2022 was going to feature my second Saturn return, the amount of arrogance and hubris that I had about this was epic. I really, really thought it was going to be easier for me than I would have either expected or what I might counsel somebody else in because of all the work I've done in the past. And Saturn has this tendency to want to reward for a job well done. And while that may still be true, nobody escapes a second Saturn return being a brutal lesson about everything that constricts you in your karmic contract.
Yeah.
So that's been the year that I've had. The distinction that my hubris was accurate about is that because of the work that I've done, I've been able to move through this year with my eyes wide open so that I wasn't caught off guard by the lessons I had to move through. They were the typical, like, my core wounds came up. My core limitations have been up all year. So it's like kind of like, here's how I've been saying it to people that I've been connecting with. It's like, there's nothing wrong in my life. My life is extraordinary, and I know that. But everything feels like a squeeze. So people who've been listening to the podcast for a long time are very aware of the journey I went on with losing my voice back in the late winter, early spring of this year, where I did some primal screaming on a body worker's table that, as it turned out, had sort of just tweaked the little bone structure in my larynx. The little bone called the hyoid was just twisted. But I didn't know that. I thought it was my vocal cords. And it took 2 months to figure out what was wrong. But the moment we found out what was wrong, I was able to fix it with a small intervention from a speech pathologist. But the idea that I would struggle with my voice when my voice is how my life works, like my life is magnificent because I found my voice and I use it. And that I moved through a year where I had to face the very real, scary possibility of like, oh my God, what would I do if I lost this connection to my voice? And that day on the body worker's table, which also happened to be a new moon in Pisces, on top of my Chiron, wounded spaces in Pisces, in the third house of the voice and communication in my private natal chart, was also the exact first day of my Saturn return.
Wow. I didn't know that actually.
Yes, it was crazy that the moment I entered the Saturn space of you're going to be confronting your contract at a high, high level, and if you don't move through this passage well, how are you going to step into the wisdom chapter of your life, that third sort of 30 years that, depending on how long I live between now and my death, is all in this wisdom status that marks everybody's second Saturn return. That, for me, it is all about owning my voice and using it powerfully. So isn't it beautiful, ironic, and horrifying that the very day my Saturn return started, my voice started expressing this limitation consciousness that took me months to sort of work through?
It's terribly poetic.
Truly. So what the last sort of month and a half has been for me has been sort of extra brutal in the Saturn return consciousness, because Saturn returned to the exact location of my birth, 18 degrees, 57 minutes of Aquarius, and immediately stopped moving. So that was 6 weeks ago. I went through the second pass of my Saturn return and had, within that few days of when that happened, an incredible, squeezy, difficult passage. And then Saturn just stopped moving because he was about to turn around. And then 3 weeks after that, which was about 3 weeks ago, he turned around and went direct and hit 18 degrees, 57 minutes, where Saturn was when I was born, yesterday. And so I come to you today on November 14th, 2022, done and free from my wild Saturn return experience. And I'm here to sort of tell the tale and have lived through it. I think one of the things that was prominent for me during these last sort of 6 months, as this has been so up, is this simultaneous feeling of feeling squeezed and constricted with lessons and like with no wiggle room to not make like any error, mistake, miscommunication turned into a lesson during these months. And even with this feeling like I was wearing a steel and concrete corset squeezing me, the mantra at the center of it was, I'm free. So that I could simultaneously feel the restriction of the work I have to do on my consciousness, while also recognizing how free I feel because of the work I've already done. Part of why I'm sharing all of this with all of you is that this is the nature of our relationship to Saturn and his squeezes, that we are both being restricted and therefore having to learn some lessons, but we also get the benefit of the freedom we're creating by facing those lessons. One of the challenges I think that people have with feeling more exultant about their passage through life is we're so focused on the breakdowns and the challenges that we forget to pay attention to all the ways that we can see how much we've grown. This is why our relationships are so important, because it's through our connections with others and their ability to reflect back to us the growth over time that we cannot see for ourselves. We do that for each other. Mm-hmm. And we are just coming out of a 2-year period where Saturn, the teacher, and Uranus, the great awakener, have been holding this 90-degree conflict energy. And when Saturn went retrograde, essentially 3 weeks ago, signaled the end of my Saturn return, as I've just outlined, but it also signals the completion of a 2-year cycle that was more prominent last year than this year, but activated with all of the different lunations and Mercury movements and Venus movements this year, this very challenging square between lessons and waking up through conflict. And it's finally starting to disengage, and we're going to talk all about it in today's episode. So about 3 weeks ago, Saturn went direct in Aquarius at 18 degrees, 40-something minutes of that sign. Now, if you've been following me for any appreciable amount of time, you probably know that I don't talk a lot about social planet and outer planet retrogrades. Social media will be filled with memes about like, oh my God, Neptune's going direct or Neptune's going retrograde and it has this and that, impact on you. And it won't. It just doesn't. Outer planet retrogrades and direct motions are not an energy that we respond to as directly as the memes would have you sort of feel. I believe this is true even with the social planets of Saturn and Jupiter, unless it's directly impacting your natal chart. So I will talk about retrograding planets in a private session with somebody because I'll talk about how it's impacting their chart. Mm-hmm. But out there in the world, when I'm talking about astrology that's general for everybody, in my Red Robe Astrology videos, my daily Astro Alert subscription series, and this podcast, and the Global Healing Meditations, I don't talk about those retrograde cycles shifting because we don't feel them in a day-to-day, how am I running my life today? Mm-hmm. And my favorite example of this was this last year. I absolutely saw when Neptune was turning around. I saw a meme one day that said, I can't remember if it was direct or retrograde, and it doesn't freaking matter, but I saw a meme one day that said, Neptune's turning around, clarity finally coming. And the next day I was like, Neptune's turning around, clarity goes out the window.
Oh.
Because it doesn't fucking matter. It doesn't do that change. It's too big. The winds of directional movement that the outer planets and the social planets do when they change direction is so subtle. Your sails are not picking them up. Mm-hmm. Anyway, this is just a pet peeve of mine, and it almost doesn't matter, except that here's a great reason to talk about Saturn going direct at 18 plus degrees of Aquarius is because he's sailing out of Aquarius. By the time we get to like the end of February, he changes signs and moves into Pisces. A very big change in sensation that we will talk about next year. Mm-hmm. But that's important to talk about a retrograde that now changes Saturn's sign placement in a couple of months, because now that retrograde and him turning around and going direct has deeper meaning. He's sailing through the rest of the sign without backtracking. And so we're going to be complete over the next 4 or 5 months of everything that, Saturn in Aquarius is bringing us. Mm-hmm. But by the same token, back to this square that Saturn and Uranus have been holding for 2 years. It started to loosen up in 2022, but they were still close enough to the square that every passing moon cycle or Mercury movement or Venus transit activated this square all year, such that we were still in 2022 in a very big way, learning and growing powerfully, waking up to higher levels of awareness powerfully, because that's what Saturn and Uranus bring, but exclusively through conflict and difficulty and lesson.
Yeah.
So we have this signal with Saturn moving direct again that this conflict demand is going to start loosening up over the next couple of months and into next year. And that's certainly good news on a lot of levels. This eclipse cycle has the very interesting distinction of containing the last huzzah of the ability of transiting planets to trigger this conflict-driven wake-up lesson process. So the fixed signs are Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. Fixed signs operate in a positive way as offering foundation, steadfastness, solidity. Things that need immovable underpinnings require fixed energy. Of course, the shadow of a fixed sign is immovability and lack of flexibility and stubbornness and all that other stuff. And each of those signs have a version of stubbornness and inflexibility. But they're all the same in terms of the fixed quality. Saturn in Aquarius has been holding the lessons, and Uranus in Taurus has been sort of guiding the unexpected things that allow us to wake up, but maybe through horrible, unexpected challenges. They are close enough still, as I just outlined, to be holding a square with each other. That square's got like a 3-ish degree orb of influence right now. Right? So it's really 93 degrees that they are apart. That's pretty close, but it's starting to loosen up. So what's one of the other fixed signs but Scorpio? And that's where all the juice is in this lunar cycle. We're in the Scorpio mansion. The south node of the moon is in Scorpio. That's the past that we're dying and being reborn as we release. Venus is in Scorpio, so heart centers, emotional body, and intimacy and finance relationships in this fixed sign. And Mercury is here as well. So mind, heart, conscious awareness, and the past we are moving away from, South Node, has all been in this fixed sign of depth and intensity and a rebirth and transformation, and in an eclipse, right? So
I've been feeling that. Yeah.
Listen, my DMs, my emails, my friend group, my hiking buddies,
Everyone.
yes, everywhere we turn, everybody has been through it. And part of why, astrologically or geometrically, is that all 3 of these planets, now I'm not talking about the South Node as much as the transiting planets, Sun, conscious awareness, Venus, emotional body, Mercury, mental body, squaring Saturn and opposing Uranus. The opposition to Uranus has ripped us open with sudden, unexpected shifts and changes and pivots. Saturn has been making it a freaking in-your-face lesson, and it's an eclipse, blah, 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 blah. And so here's what's happening now, really starting this past weekend and into this week. The Scorpio stellium is no longer squaring Saturn or opposing Uranus. That all finished up before last week ended. I think Friday of last week was the final square between the Sun and Saturn. And that, the end of last week, and any of the sort of challenges of, say, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, those weekend challenges were really the final hurrah of this 2-year fixed grand cross. So as we move between last week and this week, though we are still in the same lunar cycle, right? So we're still engaged in a single energetic process that will complete with next week's new moon. There's a vast energetic change between, say, Friday of last week and just this past weekend into this week, where the Scorpio stellium folk are no longer opposing Uranus, creating sudden breakdowns, and squaring Saturn, generating deep lessons. Now what they're all doing is trining Neptune and Jupiter. Neptune and Jupiter are both in the end degrees of Pisces. Neptune is our spiritual connection. A trine is open harmony and flow. Any planet trining Neptune takes that planet's consciousness and just marinates and uplifts it with the connection to divine consciousness. Jupiter, at the very final degree of Pisces, is all about good fortune, the capacity to manifest anything. And with him being in Pisces, it's all about the inner landscape and the imagination where we connect to the potential for creation that lives inside all of us. And any planet trining Jupiter in this way is sort of taking that planet's consciousness and expanding it with the idea of, I'm the creator. I can manifest anything that I want. So, this past weekend, just the other 2 days before this podcast comes out, Venus and Mercury trined Neptune and Jupiter, bringing us into a place where the heart and the mind, which has been so busy trying to get into like congruency, where we think we want what we want, but we feel that we deserve it, and we might have to grow and change to get that into alignment. The conflict energy of the week before turned into flow and creativity over this past weekend. Now, this is not magic, and not everybody's dialing into it in exactly the same way. It's not a movie version where last week was hard and this week is the happy ending. But it is built in there that conflicts of last week are potentially turning into new levels of flow and alignment as each of these personal planets tap into the spiritual power of Neptune and the expansive power of Jupiter. So heart and mind have already done this in the last couple of days if you're hearing this podcast right at the beginning of the week. The sun is the last Scorpio traveler to do this trine to Neptune and then to Jupiter. I like that because I'd rather have the heart in a vacuum doing some work and the mind in a vacuum doing some work, and then sweep our conscious awareness that the sun brings in after the fact. Because it's kind of like we're doing all the work in the dark, and then the sun sort of reveals what we need to know now about like where we're at in this integration process. So tomorrow, Tuesday, the sun's going to trine Neptune. From just a daily weather, description, that's a gorgeous transit. That's conscious awareness and spirit in flow. The relationship between the sun and Neptune is epic because the sun's what we're consciously aware of, and Neptune is everything about the value of connecting to the unconscious. Neptune in Pisces is the unconscious itself, through which we connect to the universe, we connect to God, we connect to inspiration and imagination. So sun trining Neptune tomorrow allows our conscious awareness to expand into a sense of flow. But it ain't just random. It's after 2.5 weeks of a brutal eclipse cycle where so much change and transformation is going on that we're still in. It ain't over, but it changes gears this week. We're now the death rebirth that we're trying to get through with mind and heart in congruency shifts its sensation away from the conflicts that teach us to the availability of flow to see how well you're going to do that thing of trusting, of shutting your mind off to just let things unfold with, intuition and grace. And then at the very end of the week on Sunday, the sun will trine Jupiter, opening us up to being aware of, conscious awareness, sun, everything that's possible, Jupiter at the last degree of Pisces. So this whole week has built into it an awareness of flow that's possible now because we were courageous enough to look into the mirror harshly, intensely, authentic. I don't know what the right word is.
Sure.
nakedly, to nakedly look in front of the, into the mirror to say, like, who am I? What am I learning? Am I willing to move through these conflicts to get the benefit of the growth? That was last week. And in this week is the promise of the benefit, the flow, the spiritual connection that's possible when we've made more room in our psyche by healing and moving old wounded consciousness out of the way. And I think this week some of us are going to feel the yummy, expansive benefit of this work even before the work is done.
Sorry. I mean, I'm moving through it, you know?
Well, listen, I love that you were moved by what I'm saying, and even just you saying I'm moving through it. Zoe, you just spoke what 80% of the listeners of this podcast are feeling right now.
It's like the same thing. It just keeps coming up, and I want to be on that other side. Not that healing is done ever while we're alive, but like, you know what I mean? I really want to level up. I'm tired of continuing to work on it. I mean, it's so tiring.
Yeah, it is tiring. And the only thing that I'll say to you, Zoe, that I'm saying to everyone listening to this podcast, it's like you are leveling up. This is the work to do exactly what you just declared you desire to be done with. This is it. Sitting in the muck, doing it consciously, showing up to the work when it's required, which I know you do because I watch from this side of the room. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably somebody who's doing your work.
Yeah.
And it's something I get asked at least 6 times in every class that I teach. By the first or second class, someone will be in their process and they'll say, what do I do to heal this? And it's like, well, you might think about finding a class for expressing your consciousness unfolding and sign up for that. Oh, wait, you've already done that. And here you are, sitting in the class, looking at your stuff and working through it. Like, this is it. Life is in session. So you are doing that work. We are doing that work. And sometimes we forget that we're actually attending to our healing perfectly. It's just really uncomfortable and it's relentless. That's the discomfort. But it does change shape between last week and this week with regard to the work that we're doing right now. And I would posit a bet, Zoe, that this coming week will feel more graceful and more evidence of the flow and the yummy that you're cultivating will start to show up, and you and everybody else are going to feel this in some way. There are actually 2 ingresses this week. Ingress is the fancy term for moving into a new planet. Egress is a planet moving out of a sign. Ingress is a planet moving into a sign. Mm-hmm. So we've got Venus entering Sagittarius, leaving Scorpio and entering Sagittarius on Wednesday. And then Mercury follows suit like the very next day on Thursday. This is actually very, very good news in the intensity department. Mm. Because it has really been such an intense couple of weeks for people. And one of the hallmarks of why is just the archetype of Scorpio, arguably the most emotionally intense and tumultuous signs. And with Sun, Venus, and Mercury all in that sign and an eclipse, the amount of just pure sensation of intensity was present no matter what else was going on. Everybody would have felt everything at a much higher level, and that can cause discomfort. So that with every little way in which this lightens up, I'll sort of share with you guys so that, so you have some sense of like the looking forward to some of this stuff, lightening up. And of course, that's what the last segment of the podcast was all about, in that the humongous difference between last week and this week, just letting go of Scorpio squaring Aquarius and opposing Taurus, moving into this trine with the Pisces folks. By the same token, as Mercury and Venus leave Scorpio Wednesday and Thursday, that means our emotional body goes from a processing that is deep and emotional and tumultuous into something that's much lighter, more stimulated, all about sort of learning and growing in a much more breezy, easy way, because Sagittarius is not a water sign. It's a fire sign. So our emotions might be a little bit on fire with Venus moving into Sagittarius, but it's definitely a very different sensation to have our emotional body in a sign ruled by Jupiter, the expander, which is Sagittarius, than it was to have her in the sign ruled by Pluto, the lord of the underworld, right? So that alone is going to make a big difference to our emotional experience on Wednesday when the planet that reflects our emotional body moves into this stimulating fire sign. So for the next 3.5 weeks, your love language is more likely to be lots of stimulation and learning something new about your partners, and you're trying something new in the world of affection and sexuality because Sagittarius likes lots of different stimulation, and we'll process our feelings faster with the emotional body planet in a sign that invented fast processing and moving on to the next thing very quickly. Right? I just for the sake of breaking the fourth wall,
Thank you, God.
so and I can see each other when we record because we're on a program that includes video, and they put their hands up in a kind of celebratory, like huzzah. Yes, because that really is going to make a difference to how we feel in our bodies, because
Right.
where Venus is does impact how all of us are processing our emotions, and that's what makes the Scorpio mansion so valuable is that it's a place where we are designed to sink in and marinate and really do the death rebirth thing, right? So when we fall into the waters of Scorpio, you can be assured that they're going to boil eventually. So we have to sit with feelings. We don't get to process them so quickly. But once we move into Venus and Sag, that fiery processing, we will feel lighter as a result. Now, not that there aren't shadow artifacts of Venus and Sagittarius, which be too much stimulation, moving on too fast, saying, I'm out of here because that doesn't work for me. Faster, where Venus and Scorpio might say, let's work on this. I'm comfortable with being in deep process. In Sag, it might be like, adios. I'm on to the next thing, right? So there's a lightness to the approach to love and intimacy that is a shadow artifact in this sign where we value stimulation and movement over, real depth and intensity. But from the pure perspective of a less intense atmosphere, you can guarantee that this week will bring that, certainly with the first ingress of Venus changing signs on Wednesday. Not even 24 hours later, so on Thursday, but like right after midnight Pacific time on Thursday, Mercury will enter Sagittarius. Now, Mercury's not so happy here. It's the sign of his detriment, which is just a fancy dignitary word in astrology that means he ain't happy here. So I don't expect all of you to know, the difference between fall and detriment and exaltation, but I'll say it to you this way, archetypally, because this will make total sense. Mercury is about communication, and therefore, the more precise a sign might be when lending its energy towards communication, the happier Mercury will be. So Mercury is not happy in Sagittarius because there's no precision in that sign. There's only stimulation. So in Sagittarius, the mind might be able to connect with every idea that's possible, but can't land on any kind of focused communication because it favors the stimulation of tripping from idea to idea to thought to thought to thought to thought. So that means that communication will be more scattered during Mercury through Sag, Another artifact that's shadowy is that this is the sign of blunt truth-telling,
Hmm.
and Mercury in Sagittarius has a tendency to speak first and think later about whether or not it was a good idea to open your mouth in that way. But it's another indication that we're moving out of the depth and gravitas of the mind being driven by the intensity of the Scorpio mansion and the lighter touch that happens with Mercury in Sag. So just because Sag is a detrimental sign for Mercury doesn't mean that like it's all bad. We will feel the shift between deep and intense communication of the last couple of weeks. Might take a few days for Mercury to be moved into the sign before we'll really feel it. But by the end of the week, with both Mercury and Venus in this sign that is fiery and stimulating and ruled by Jupiter, the planet that brings good fortune, we're going to feel our hearts and our minds in a higher is probably not the right word, but a less emotionally intense place. Venus spends about 3.5 weeks in a sign, so we can expect this, whatever it feels like at the end of the week, to relate to your feelings, your emotions, your intimacy, and your finances. That quality will be with you for about 3.5 weeks. And Mercury moves through a sign in about 2.5 weeks. And so communication in this somewhat scattered but lots of connection to ideas sort of way will drive your thoughts for about 2.5 weeks once that ingress takes place in the middle of this week. But again, I'm sharing this mostly to say between the Scorpio stellium trining Neptune and Jupiter at the beginning of this week, and by the end of the week, Venus and Mercury out of the lugubrious, intense waters of Scorpio and into Sag, this week marks a kind of getting out of the world below, where all of the death and transformation was taking place. And we sort of finished the week kind of like the phoenix, if you will. Like the phoenix dies and rises in the fire. Venus and Mercury moving into the fire sign of Sagittarius, that would be the fire sign of the phoenix rising, right? Phoenix ain't going to rise in Aries. It's too immature of an archetype to create a phoenix, right? Leo is too self-focused, right? But Sagittarius is the third fire sign. It's the more spiritually evolved fire sign. It's the fire that says the phoenix rises out of the depth of the death rebirth we're just coming out of. And by the time we get to the end of this week, the most intense month of the year will feel a little bit lighter. Have at it, everybody.
All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show.
This week we have an email in Dreamer, and our email's from AJ, and he says, "Hey Michael and Zoe, I had this dream last night, more of a nightmare really, and it was kind of a doozy. In the dream, I was my current age of 20, and I had 3 children, a daughter about 7, another child around 5, and a little baby under 1. I couldn't remember their names, and this was a theme throughout the entire dream. They were mine, and though I love them dearly, I was really stressed. It's not even funny. I'm not sure who the other parent was, as there was no partner or partner figure in the dream. I was filled to the brim with a sense of dread, which only grew as things got worse. I should warn you that the dream includes a little bit of implied violence.
Trigger warning.
Me and my 3 babies went to my parents' for a dinner, and the whole family was there. I only have 2 siblings. I'm in the middle, but in the dream, I had 6. It was hectic, and while I had some help with the kids, I kept forgetting their names and could feel mounting judgment from my family for how much I struggled to remember. I think it's important to note that I had Father's Day family dinner the next day. I think that's in real life. Yeah. I don't remember exactly how it happened, but the worst part of the dream was that my father, not my real father, but some man dressed in robes, kind of like a priest, getting very angry and violent with me, chased me up the stairs. I believe he had a knife. He injured my middle child with it, and I had no choice but to cradle the child to me as I raced up the stairs away from this father. These stairs felt endless and were so precarious that I could have fallen over the edge and down countless stories all the way to the ground. Eventually, I ran out of stairs and turned to see this father round the last corner. He had anger in his eyes and fists, and I had no idea what he might do. I just knew we weren't safe. So, to protect my child, I gently pushed him backwards off the railing. I could feel my stomach drop in horror as I registered what I'd done. A couple of my siblings came out from rooms adjacent, and we began going down the stairs. I refused to look over the banister the entire time. I felt numb at this point and horrified about how things unfolded. I woke up as we were walking down the stairs. That's the end of AJ's dream, and he also added afterwards, he's wondering how much of my pain and rage and hurt is my own and how much is my mother's. She had her first kid at 21 and her life totally changed. And then he's also wondering how much my connection with my father has suffered since I came out to him in the 8th grade and everything that's followed. Thank you for the reading. I hope you have a lovely week, AJ.
Well, thank you, AJ. I hope I have a lovely week, too. You know, I want to start by talking about the power of naming. It's one of the most important things we do as human beings is to name something. Whether you're talking about the pedestrian notion of, you get a puppy, you think of its name. You birth a child, you must choose its name. So, like, literal names of people are so significant because they are our avatars, if you will, Mm-hmm. Michael is just a symbol that represents me and, like, millions of other people named Michael. But so naming is important. But we also, in more higher consciousness circles and new thought circles, we would talk about naming something as the act of owning or declaring that you own an idea or a process that you're in, or, sometimes language like this is like worthy of making fun of. I'm suddenly thinking about like little comedy sketches, where 2 people are just talking to each other in that woke speak, where they're saying like, well, when you speak like that, I am present for an experience of emotional disconnect. And when those kind of things. And so naming is sort of like that. It's like, there's something going on with me and I'd like to name it. So I'm mocking it, but I'm making the point of that's fucking powerful.
Yeah.
Like when you have a conversation with somebody about something that's challenging you and you speak it, you're like naming it. When you are facing a project or a goal or a thing that is nebulous, frightening, but important to you, naming it becomes the first step to accomplishing it. So this idea of I can't remember his children's names, to me becomes a symbol of aspects of self. Remember, they're not his kids because he doesn't have kids.
Right.
So AJ's children in his dreams are newer, younger aspects of self. So if he's 20, the first child represents stuff that came up when he was 13.
Interesting.
If he's 20, then the middle child is stuff that came up when he was 15. If he's 20, then the baby is something that's brand spanking new.
Yeah.
So this is a young man who's gay, coming out to his family, and whatever challenges that may have led to in waking life. I think this dream is about there are aspects of me that are new but important and valuable parts of how I express that I cannot name in front of my family. So even just use gay for a second. If I declare that I'm gay and you don't know it, it's like I am naming that I am gay. I'm putting a name to my gay identity. But if I have a dream that one of the pieces of identity that's represented by a child, that I can't remember its name, and we have this story that AJ has in fact come out to his family and that has been problematic, this dream to me is representing all of the different aspects of self that AJ is not able to fully own in his family dynamic. Which is true for lots of us as we move and grow through life. Who we become out in the world, we lose sometimes when we go back to Thanksgiving, right? We go back to be with our families and all the growth that we've sort of been able to put into place in other environments. The last place it's going to show up as whole and integrated is likely to be in your family environment. And so I really think this dread feeling that AJ can't name these children in the family environment is reflecting aspects of self that are 7 years old, 5 years old, and brand new. Certainly, I don't know when AJ came out, but certainly at 13, he might have been hip to his gayness. At 15-ish, he might have come out. And then recently, he's, up to something based on that newborn babe that's in this dream.
He said he came out in 8th grade, which would be around 13, 14.
Listen, and this doesn't have to be like exact and precise.
Got
like
it.
if it's like, well, that didn't happen at 13, it happened at 15. It's like a bunch of years ago, there's a consciousness that rose up. 2 years later, something else. So that might be the awareness of gay and the declaration of gay, the first two children, right? So what I love about the father figure sort of dressed in robes, that to me speaks to that the father wound is sometimes the very access we have to deepening our consciousness and our awareness of healing and growing and being led by a spiritual desire to heal and grow. I certainly know for myself as a gay man who had a father, and can tell you that every challenge I've had in love and intimacy comes from the relationship I have with my father. And at 59 years old, I'm still working that shit through. I like to say that intimacy was the last thing on my list because I was, operating on other, working on other aspects of self that, that in the last 4 or 5 years, I've been attending to lessons on intimacy. And thank God I'm old enough to be able to work through those faster than I could in my 20s, 30s, and even my 40s. But I can tell you, as a gay man, daddy issues are going to be the source of the wounding and the healing on some primary level. So the father dressed as a priest with a knife might seem awful in the dream state, but in the interpretation land, it's the father wound is also the spiritual access. The knife says, I will penetrate into this whatever wound consciousness I have to get to, and it's going to chase me up the stairs, which is synonymous to higher levels of awareness. He's reaching higher levels of awareness because he's facing the destructiveness and the depth and the intensity of the father wound, represented in this case by dad in a robe with a knife. It's that middle child that was in danger. So I'm very curious about what would we say is the sort of 5-year-old consciousness, which I'm just going to declare no matter when he came out, that middle child has something to do with coming out as gay. And that's the child that's in danger with the daddy issues because I think AJ's working something out about his gay identity vis-a-vis the family that created him, accepting him or not. And his inability to name the child is reflective of the disconnect that still exists between AJ and his sense of identity when it comes to trying to connect with his family in an authentic way. And of course, the fact that there's an infant in this mix is very good news, because that child is the consciousness that's just been born of a new level of integration that's possible, I think, now. So all of that precarious, staircases and, being shoved up the high, the height into higher levels, and the precariousness is just symbols of growth. Growth is scary and precarious. We feel like we could fall off the cliff at any given moment. But as we go up, we learn more about higher levels. And then he runs out of stairs, right? So to me, that's the top of his consciousness that's available right now. He can't go any further up. Now he has to face that demon. So I think being chased up the stairs is about being, aware at a higher level, but it's also reflecting, I'm going to run from this issue until I run out of stairs to run in, and I actually have to turn around and face the demon of, am I accepted? I don't want to put words into AJ's mouth. He's not here to talk about this father wound and what his, how his gayness is being challenged. But I think that's what happens at the very top of the stairs when he turns to face the chasing father. That becomes the moment of, all right, here's where we're at. I don't get to avoid this stuff anymore. So the only thing we have left to contextualize is throwing the child off the railings in order to protect or save the moment.
No, I think it's throwing the father off.
Ooh, did I mishear that? Double check.
Yeah, so he cradles the child as he races up the stairs, and then to protect his child and himself, he pushes the father off the railing.
Oh, even better. That's great. That's to take the idea of wound and toss it over the railing, kill it off, because it's an old story. The 1-month-old child is the new story. The 5-year-old child is the old story. Mm-hmm. So again, AJ is not here for us to ask these detailed questions. So forgive me, AJ, if I'm really bastardizing your story.
Right.
But I think this middle child that he's protecting is his sort of identity as a gay man coming out to his parents and whatever that looked like with daddy issues and wounds therein. He's got to protect that. So what he has to kill off is not his dad. It's not dad's dream. It's also not a murder because it's a dream. It's a transformation in action. By pushing the father off the staircase, he's saying, I am done with that old fight. I am no longer needing to engage with my father as the enemy. I want a new experience. So I'm going to throw that story off the railing because then a new story will rise up. In fact, one of the languages in AJ's email was countless stories. Mm-hmm. He was describing how many stories he had to climb, stories of a building, right? Climbing up stories. But, puns are everything. Mm-hmm. Countless stories are like, all the stories he's told himself about who he is, who his father is, what it's like to be a gay man, blah, blah, blah. Those stories have to change. We throw our father off the railing. That's an invitation to transform this particular wounded consciousness that feels like it's dangerous, but really is just an old shadow idea rearing up, looking to be seen, gotten, named, and released. Wow. What a dream.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the Daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.